It started with one innocent question over dinner. She asked if I'd ever thought about an open marriage. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But her eyes told a different story. I couldn't believe what she was saying. But as I dug deeper, I started to uncover secrets she had been hiding for months. I always thought I had a pretty average, decent life. 13 years married to a woman I loved, a comfortable home in Chicago, steady jobs, no major drama. That's how it had been for me and Rachel. She's always been thoughtful. The kind of wife who makes sure you have lunch ready when you're running late and texts you a random "I miss you" in the middle of the day. Honestly, I used to think I was one of the lucky ones. That was until about a month ago when Rachel dropped something on me that I never saw coming. We were having dinner at home, nothing special, just the two of us, like any other weeknight. Rachel had made spaghetti, and we were talking about work and the usual stuff. Then, right in the middle of twirling pasta on her fork, she casually says, "Have you ever thought about opening up our marriage?" I choked on my food. I swear, if she had told me she was quitting her job and moving to another country, I would have been less surprised. I stared at her for a second, trying to figure out if she was joking or serious, but her face was perfectly calm. No nervous twitch, no awkward laugh. She really meant it. "What?" I finally managed to ask, thinking maybe I had misunderstood her. "You know, like other couples do sometimes," she said, looking down at her plate as if she were talking about trying a new hobby. "They still love each other, but they see other people too. It's just something I've been thinking about." The room felt colder all of a sudden. This was the woman I had been with for more than a decade. We shared everything, our lives, our struggles, our triumphs, and here she was, out of the blue, bringing up something like this. It felt like the ground had shifted under my feet. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. My brain was struggling to make sense of the words she had just spoken. This was Rachel, my wife of 13 years, the woman who couldn't even keep a secret about what she got me for my birthday, much less something like this. I pushed my plate aside, suddenly not hungry anymore. "You're serious about this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my stomach was doing flips. Rachel shrugged, keeping her eyes fixed on her half-eaten spaghetti. "It's just an idea. I've been thinking about it, and I wanted to know what you thought." She was talking like it was no big deal, as if she had just suggested redecorating the living room. "What made you start thinking about it?" I pressed. I needed to understand where this was coming from because nothing in our relationship had prepared me for this. She paused, twirling her fork around a single strand of spaghetti. "Well, some of my friends have been talking about it, and it got me wondering if maybe it's something that could work for us. I mean, we've been together a long time, Chris. Maybe it would keep things exciting." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Exciting. Was she really that bored with our life together? The way she was talking made me feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump into something dangerous, while I was stuck on solid ground, struggling to catch up. But I didn't want to make a scene. Not yet. I decided to hear her out, even though my gut was telling me this conversation was heading in a direction I wouldn't like. "Have you been unhappy?" I asked quietly. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Rachel finally looked up, her green eyes meeting mine with a mixture of guilt and determination. "No, not unhappy," she said quickly. "It's not like that. I still love you, Chris. I just think this might be something new, something different." Different. That word stuck in my head, ringing like a bell. I tried to wrap my mind around it. Rachel was the last person I would have ever expected to want something like this. Our marriage had always been solid. Or so I thought. "You don't have to decide right now," she added, leaning back in her chair. "I just wanted to bring it up. We don't have to do it if you're not comfortable." There it was. That little escape hatch she was offering me, like she was trying to soften the blow. But the damage was already done. The fact that she had even brought it up in the first place made me question everything I thought I knew about us. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to say much more. "Yeah, I'll think about it." But in the back of my mind, a dark thought started creeping in. What if this wasn't just about an idea? What if she was already seeing someone else? After that dinner, things felt different between us. Rachel acted like the conversation had never happened, going about her day as if everything was normal. But for me, there was this constant buzzing in the back of my mind. Every time I looked at her, I kept wondering if I was missing something. Was she already thinking about someone else? Was she planning something behind my back? I hated that these thoughts were creeping in, but I couldn't stop them. At night, while Rachel slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation over and over in my head. What if this was just a passing thought for her? Something she picked up from her friends and nothing more? But what if it was more than that? The question swirled around in my brain, making it impossible to rest. I thought about her friends, specifically Melissa and Katie, who she had been spending a lot of time with lately. I had met them a few times at parties or get-togethers, and they always struck me as the type who liked to push boundaries. They were both younger and more carefree in ways Rachel never had been. When we got married, Rachel was the steady one, the one who kept me grounded. But now, maybe hanging out with them had given her some new ideas. I started to pay closer attention to Rachel's behavior. It was subtle at first. Her phone always seemed to be in her hand, even when we were just sitting on the couch watching TV. She would get messages late at night and I would hear the soft ping, but when I asked who it was, she would just smile and say, "Oh, just Melissa being her usual self." I tried to shrug it off. I really did. But that sinking feeling in my gut kept telling me something wasn't right. And it wasn't long before I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Rachel was already crossing a line I hadn't seen. One night, after she had fallen asleep, I found myself standing in front of her laptop, which she had left on the kitchen counter. My heart pounded in my chest as I debated what to do. Was I really going to snoop on my wife? I had never been that guy before. I always trusted Rachel, but now I felt like I was being pushed into this shadowy place where trust was starting to crumble. I opened the laptop, my fingers trembling. It was password protected, of course, but I knew her well enough to guess her password. It was our anniversary date. As soon as I typed it in, the screen unlocked. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me, but I pressed forward. I clicked through her emails, her social media, trying to find anything that might explain why she had suggested an open marriage. But there was nothing. No secret messages, no flirtatious emails, nothing that pointed to infidelity. For a moment, I felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had overreacted. But then again, my gut still gnawed at me, whispering that something was off. I just hadn't found it yet. I closed the laptop quietly and went back to bed, lying there in the dark, wondering if Rachel was hiding something that couldn't be found on a screen. In the days following my late-night snooping, I tried to act normal. I wanted to believe that I had imagined it all, that Rachel was just curious and not actually acting on anything. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more obvious it became that things were not the same between us. Something had shifted. Rachel seemed distracted when we talked, her responses shorter, like her mind was somewhere else. We would sit together at dinner, and she would scroll through her phone more than usual. Even when she was physically present, it felt like her attention was somewhere else, with someone else. It was a Friday night when everything started to spiral. Rachel was getting ready to go out with Melissa and Katie. They had been planning this girls' night for a while, and I had no problem with it. I wanted her to have fun, to enjoy herself. But that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. As she stood in front of the mirror putting on lipstick, I casually asked, "Where are you guys going tonight?" "Oh, just a bar downtown," she said, not looking away from her reflection. "It'll be fun. We'll probably get home late." "Do you want me to pick you up if you've had too much to drink?" I offered. She laughed softly. "No, don't worry about it. We'll Uber back." There was something in her tone, a dismissiveness that rubbed me the wrong way. I told myself I was being paranoid, that this was just a regular night out with friends, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. After she left, I found myself pacing the house, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. I thought about texting her, just to check in, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to be that guy. The jealous husband sitting at home glued to his phone, imagining the worst. So instead, I tried to distract myself. I turned on the TV, opened a beer, but no matter what I did, my mind kept drifting back to Rachel. As the night wore on, I couldn't resist the urge any longer. I picked up my phone and texted her, "How's your night going?" I stared at the screen, waiting for a response. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. I told myself she was just busy having fun, that she'd text me back when she could. But that voice in the back of my head kept whispering, what if she's not with her friends at all? It was close to midnight when she finally responded, "Hey, sorry, just busy having fun. Love you." I wanted to believe it. I really did. But something about that message felt off. It was too generic, too perfect. And the fact that it had taken her so long to reply only made my suspicions worse. Unable to sleep, I sat on the couch, watching the hours tick by. Rachel didn't come home until nearly 3 a.m., and when she did, she was unusually quiet. She slipped into the bedroom without saying much, claiming she was too tired to talk. I lay awake in the dark, feeling her presence next to me, but somehow, she felt further away than ever. That night, as I stared at the ceiling in the dark, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how deep it went. The weekend passed without much conversation. Rachel spent most of it either glued to her phone or making excuses to leave the house, errands, seeing friends, anything that kept her away. I tried to act like everything was fine, but inside, I was restless, my mind working overtime to piece together what might be going on. Sunday night, after we finished dinner, I decided it was time to bring it up again. I couldn't let this feeling fester any longer. As Rachel cleared the dishes, I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her. "So, I've been thinking about that conversation we had," I said carefully, keeping my tone neutral. She glanced at me but didn't stop what she was doing. "About what?" "About the open marriage thing." Rachel froze for just a second, her hand hovering over the sink before she continued washing the plates. "Oh, that. Yeah, that," I echoed. "I've been trying to wrap my head around it. I mean, you just dropped it out of nowhere, and now, I don't know. I feel like we're not even talking about it." She sighed, wiping her hands on a towel before turning to face me. "I told you, Chris. It was just something I wanted to discuss. It's not like I was demanding anything. You said you'd think about it, so I've been giving you space." Her words made sense on the surface, but her expression told a different story. She looked tense, almost defensive, as if she was expecting me to accuse her of something. I wasn't ready to throw accusations around, but I was also not ready to let it go. "I know, but—" "Something feels off, Rachel," I said, trying to tread lightly. "It's like you're not really here anymore. I can't shake the feeling that you're hiding something from me." Rachel's eyes flicked down to the floor for a moment before she crossed her arms over her chest. "I'm not hiding anything. I've just been busy, okay? My friends are going through stuff. Work has been crazy. Life gets hectic sometimes." It was a reasonable answer, except it didn't explain the distance I felt between us. It didn't explain why my gut was screaming at me that something was wrong. "Busy or not," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "We haven't really talked about us. I mean, do you even want to be with me anymore? Because that's what it feels like. You're here, but you're not really here." Her face softened for a moment, and she took a step toward me, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. "Of course I still want to be with you, Chris. I love you. I wouldn't have brought up the open marriage if I didn't." That threw me off. "Wait. What?" Rachel gave a small, sad smile. "I only brought it up because I didn't want to lose you. I thought maybe if we tried something new, it would help us stay connected." Stay connected. The more she talked, the less sense it made. How would opening our marriage make us closer? But the way she said it, with that genuine tone, almost made me believe she was telling the truth. Almost. I nodded, not wanting to push any further just yet. "All right, I'll keep thinking about it." Rachel smiled weakly and went back to cleaning up, as if that conversation had put everything to rest. But I knew better. Something was still wrong, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt like this wasn't just about us growing apart. There was something else at play, something Rachel wasn't telling me, and I was going to find out what. By the following week, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers, and Rachel wasn't giving me the whole picture. I had gone from feeling confused and hurt to becoming obsessed with finding out what was really going on. Her sudden proposal of an open marriage had thrown me off balance, but now it seemed like there was more hiding beneath the surface. I couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, after Rachel had gone to bed early, claiming she had a headache, I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, my mind elsewhere. I kept replaying the last few weeks over and over, trying to pinpoint where everything had started to go wrong. What had changed? And why did it feel like she was slipping away right before my eyes? The laptop was sitting on the coffee table, just like it had been that night I checked it. I knew I had found nothing suspicious before, but something in me snapped. I needed answers. Rachel had been so careful. No incriminating texts, no odd emails. But that only made me more determined to find out if she was really hiding something. I opened the laptop again, feeling that same rush of guilt. The screen flickered to life, and I started digging through her browser history. It was mostly mundane stuff, shopping sites, social media, a couple of articles. But then I found something that made my heart skip a beat. A private browser window. She had been using incognito mode. I clicked it open, and my stomach clenched. Rachel had been visiting online forums about open marriages and polyamorous relationships. It wasn't just a passing curiosity. It was something she had been actively researching. There were posts from months ago, long before she had brought it up to me. She had been planning this for a while. I kept scrolling, feeling sicker with each click. She had left comments on some of the posts, under an anonymous username, of course, but I knew it was her. She had been asking for advice about how to introduce the idea of an open marriage to a traditional partner, how to convince her husband, me, to go along with it. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just some spontaneous idea. This was something she had been building toward for months, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't doing it alone. I kept digging, desperate to find more. I searched her messages again, looking for any hidden clues. That's when I noticed something odd. A gap in her text history with Melissa, her closest friend. It was subtle, but there were missing messages, like parts of a conversation had been deleted. My blood ran cold. What if Melissa wasn't just a friend? What if she had been helping Rachel all along, covering for her, encouraging her? The weight of it all crashed down on me. This was no longer about Rachel being curious or looking to spice things up. This was about betrayal. I knew I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. Something had been off for a long time, and now I was starting to see the cracks in the facade. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to be sure. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling, and sat back on the couch. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of suspicion, unable to catch my breath. If Rachel had been hiding this, what else was she keeping from me? How far had she already gone? The next few days felt like a waiting game. I had become hyper-aware of everything Rachel did. Every glance at her phone, every time she left the house without a clear reason. I was looking for any sign that would confirm my suspicions, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to the surface. On Thursday evening, Rachel said she was going to Melissa's for another girls' night. My gut twisted the same way it had before. She was dressed casually, nothing too fancy. But the way she carefully applied her makeup and took extra time in front of the mirror struck me as odd. She was going to see Melissa, right? "Do you need me to drop you off?" I asked casually, trying to hide my growing suspicion. "No, I'll just drive myself." "Thanks, though," she said, flashing me a quick smile that felt far too practiced. "I'll probably be late, so don't wait up." The moment she walked out the door, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I had no real plan, just a deep need to know where she was really going. I kept a distance, my heart pounding as I tailed her car through the city streets. I half expected her to head toward Melissa's house, but when she took a different route, my stomach dropped. She pulled into a parking lot outside a restaurant. Not some low-key bar or dive, but a nicer place. The kind of place we used to go to for date nights. The Vine Bistro. I parked a few spaces down, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. Was she meeting someone here? I watched as Rachel got out of the car and glanced around, as if she was checking to see if anyone was watching. She then walked quickly toward the entrance, her heels clicking on the pavement. I waited a few minutes before following her inside, keeping my head down as I entered the dimly lit restaurant. I spotted her almost immediately. She was sitting in a booth near the back, and across from her was, not Melissa, but a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a sharp button-down shirt, his posture relaxed as he leaned forward to talk to her. The way Rachel smiled at him, the way her hand brushed his across the table, it was all I needed to see. My chest tightened as I stood frozen at the entrance, trying to process what I was witnessing. This wasn't just a casual dinner. This was something else entirely. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Rachel wasn't just thinking about an open marriage. She was already living it. I slipped back outside before she could see me, my mind racing. The reality of what I had just seen hit me like a ton of bricks. Rachel had been lying to me for weeks, maybe months. Everything she had said about her friends and wanting to keep things exciting was just a cover for what she had already been doing behind my back. I sat in my car for a long time, staring blankly out the windshield, trying to make sense of it all. The woman I had trusted for 13 years had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And the worst part? She had been careful. Too careful. She hadn't left a trace because she never thought I would follow her. Never thought I would dig deep enough to uncover her secret. But now I knew. And there was no turning back from it. The drive home felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. I kept seeing Rachel's face in my mind. The way she smiled at that man. The way her hand had brushed his so effortlessly, like this was normal for her. All the suspicions that had been eating at me were now confirmed. She was cheating on me. There was no other explanation for what I had seen. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my anger was simmering just beneath the surface. I didn't want to explode, but I knew I couldn't sit on this any longer. She would be home soon, and when she walked through that door, everything would change. The life we had built over the last 13 years was about to shatter into pieces. I paced around the living room, trying to figure out what I was going to say. Part of me wanted to throw all the evidence in her face. The secret forum posts, the missing texts, the fact that I had followed her to the restaurant and watched her meet another man. But another part of me just felt empty, like I had already lost her the moment she brought up the idea of an open marriage. It was after midnight when I heard Rachel's car pull into the driveway. My heart pounded as I watched the headlights sweep across the living room window. And a second later, the front door creaked open. She stepped inside, looking tired but content, as if she had just come back from an ordinary night out with friends. "Hey," she said softly, kicking off her shoes. "Sorry I'm so late. We stayed out longer than I thought." I stood there, arms crossed, staring at her. The anger that had been building inside me was boiling over, but I did my best to keep my voice steady. "You weren't with Melissa tonight." Rachel froze, her hand halfway to her purse. She turned to look at me, her eyes widening just a fraction. "What are you talking about?" "I followed you," I said, my voice cold. "I saw you at the Vine Bistro, with him." Her face drained of color. For a moment she just stood there, speechless, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words. But the guilt was written all over her face. She knew she was caught. "Chris, it's not what you think," she said finally, taking a step toward me. I laughed bitterly. "Not what I think. You were having dinner with another man. You've been lying to me for weeks, maybe even longer, and you expect me to believe it's not what I think." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "Please, let me explain," she begged. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I snapped. "No, Rachel, it's actually pretty simple. You've been cheating on me. You've been seeing someone else, lying to my face, and then coming home to me like nothing's wrong." Tears streamed down her cheeks now, and she wiped at them furiously, as if she was trying to keep herself together. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I was going to tell you, but I didn't know how." I shook my head in disbelief. "When you brought up the open marriage, that was just your way of easing me into it, wasn't it? You wanted to keep seeing him, but you didn't want to feel guilty about it." She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. But I didn't. It didn't start off like this. We were just friends at first, I swear. And then, I don't know, it got out of hand." I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak that I could barely contain. "So you thought asking for an open marriage would make it okay? That I'd just go along with it so you could keep cheating without any consequences?" She sobbed harder, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse to her chest. "I didn't want to hurt you, Chris. I love you, I really do. But I don't know how to fix this." My heart ached hearing those words, but I knew the truth now. This wasn't something that could be fixed. Rachel had made her choice, and it had destroyed everything between us. "I don't want to hear it," I said quietly. "I want a divorce." Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face full of panic. "No, please don't say that. We can work through this. I made a mistake, but I still love you. We can go to counseling, we can—" "I'm done," I interrupted, my voice hard and final. "You made your decision, and now I'm making mine." The days after that confrontation felt like I was living in someone else's life. The home I had shared with Rachel for over a decade now felt cold and hollow, like it belonged to strangers. I moved into the guest room, leaving our bedroom to her. But even that wasn't enough space to escape the tension that hung between us. Rachel tried everything to get me to reconsider. She apologized endlessly, told me how much she loved me, and promised it hadn't gone too far with the guy she had been seeing. She insisted that it had been an emotional affair, that she hadn't slept with him, but I couldn't believe her anymore. Whether she had slept with him or not was irrelevant now. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. Every time I saw her, every time she tried to talk to me, all I could picture was her sitting across from that man, smiling at him like she used to smile at me. I couldn't get the image out of my head, and I didn't want to hear her excuses. She had broken something in me that couldn't be fixed. One evening, she sat down next to me on the couch, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. "Chris, please," she whispered. "We can fix this. We can go to therapy, work on our marriage. I don't want to lose you." I stared at the TV, my jaw clenched. "Rachel, it's over. I told you that. There's no going back." Her voice broke as she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I love you. I was stupid. I made a mistake, but I love you." "Love?" I laughed bitterly, finally turning to face her. "You don't cheat on someone you love. You don't lie to their face and then come home and act like nothing's wrong. That's not love, Rachel. You don't even understand what you've done, do you?" She started crying again. But this time, I didn't feel any sympathy. I couldn't afford to. I had spent years trusting her, believing in us. And now I felt like I had wasted those years on someone I no longer recognized. "I thought about it," I said, my voice hard. "About giving you another chance. I really did. But then I realized something. I can't live like this. I can't look at you and not see what you did. And even if we went to therapy, even if we tried to work through it, I would never trust you again. Do you understand that? It's gone." Her sobs filled the room, and for a moment, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered what had led us here. She had made her choice, and now we were both living with the consequences. "I'll move out," she said finally, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know I can't stay here like this. But Chris, please, can we just talk to someone? One last try? I shook my head. I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. She gasped, like the final blow had just been dealt. I hadn't told her about the lawyer until now. I wanted to wait until I was absolutely sure. And after days of sleepless nights, I knew I had made the right decision. Rachel stood up, pacing the room as if she was trying to make sense of what was happening. "This can't be it," she muttered. "This can't be how it ends." "It ended the minute you decided to lie to me," I said coldly. "I don't care if you didn't sleep with him. You betrayed me, and that's enough." She collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with sobs, but I was done. I had given her the benefit of the doubt once before when she first brought up the idea of an open marriage. I had even checked her phone and computer, hoping to find nothing, hoping I was wrong. But now I knew that it had been going on long before I found out, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I stood up, feeling an odd sense of calm wash over me. "I'll pack my things tomorrow," I said. "You can have the house. I don't want anything from you." Rachel looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Chris, don't, please. We can start over." I shook my head slowly. "No, Rachel. We can't." I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the couch. I knew there was no point in dragging this out any longer. The love I had for her was gone, replaced by a dull ache that I knew would take time to heal. But I also knew that this was the only way forward. I had to let her go. I had to let us go. The next morning, I packed my bags. It was surreal, gathering up the pieces of a life I had spent over a decade building with Rachel, only to watch it fall apart in a matter of days. I could hear her moving around the house, her steps quiet, like she was afraid to disturb me. But there was no need for her to tiptoe around anymore. We both knew what was coming. As I zipped up my suitcase, I paused for a moment, looking around the guest room. It felt strange to think that this was it. All the memories, all the shared moments, the laughter, the quiet mornings, and the late-night conversations, they were all part of a life that no longer existed. Rachel had taken something from me when she betrayed me, something I could never get back. She came to the door as I was leaving, standing there in her robe, her face pale and drawn from lack of sleep. Her eyes were red from crying, but she didn't say anything. Maybe she had run out of words, or maybe she knew that nothing she said now could change what had already been set in motion. "I'll be at a hotel for a while," I said flatly, not looking at her directly. "Once the paperwork is sorted, we can figure out the rest." Rachel opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. She just nodded slowly, her hands trembling as she clutched the edges of her robe. There was so much I wanted to say, so many things I could have thrown back at her, but in the end, what was the point? I left without looking back. I walked out of the house, the same house where we had built a life together, and stepped into the cool morning air. The weight of it all was crushing. But at the same time, there was a strange sense of relief. I had made my decision, and there was no going back now. As I drove away, my mind raced with thoughts of what came next. Part of me wondered if I had made the right choice, if maybe, just maybe, there was a way to salvage what was left of our marriage. But that thought passed quickly. The trust was gone, and without that, there was nothing to build on. No matter how much I had loved Rachel, we were done. But the road ahead was not as clear as I hoped it would be. I kept thinking about Rachel's last plea for counseling, her desperation in trying to save what we had, even after the damage was done. There was a time when I would have fought for us, would have given anything to keep our marriage alive. But now, I wasn't sure if there was anything left worth saving. And yet, as the miles stretched out in front of me, I couldn't help but wonder, was this really the end? Or was there a part of me still holding on to the possibility of a different outcome? The questions lingered in my mind, unanswered, as I drove into the uncertainty of what came next. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I checked into a hotel and spent my days at work, trying to distract myself from the reality of what was happening. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the weight of the situation always crept back in during the quiet moments. The silence of the hotel room at night was deafening. I had left behind everything I knew, our home, our routines, our shared life. And now I was left with an emptiness that I couldn't fill. Rachel called a few times, leaving voicemails that I couldn't bring myself to listen to. I wasn't ready to hear her apologies, her pleas for reconciliation. It was too soon. I wasn't even sure if I could ever face her again without feeling the sting of betrayal. I met with my lawyer to start the divorce process. Sitting in that office, going over the paperwork, it all felt so cold and clinical. The end of a marriage distilled into signatures and legal jargon. I never imagined it would come to this. But there I was, signing away the life I thought we had. A part of me kept wondering if I was doing the right thing. Rachel had made a mistake, a huge one. But wasn't marriage supposed to be about working through the tough times? Had I really tried everything to save us? Or had I just given up too soon? These thoughts haunted me. But every time I started to doubt my decision, I remembered the look on her face when I confronted her, the lies she had told, and the man she had chosen over me. That was what kept me going, knowing that trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild. One evening, I got a text from Rachel. It was short, simple, and to the point. "Can we talk? Just once. I need closure. You do too." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to cut off all contact and move on. But another part of me, maybe the part that still remembered the good times, the part that had loved her for over a decade, wanted to hear what she had to say. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet her. We decided on a coffee shop, a neutral place where we could talk without the heaviness of the past weighing us down. When I arrived, Rachel was already there, sitting at a table by the window, nervously fidgeting with her coffee cup. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. Her eyes, once so full of life, were now clouded with sadness and regret. I sat down across from her, unsure of what to say. There was a long, uncomfortable silence before Rachel finally spoke. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "I know I don't deserve it, but I appreciate it." I nodded, still not sure what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her how much she had hurt me, but another part of me just wanted to listen. "I messed up, Chris," she continued, her eyes welling up with tears. "I know that. I've been thinking about it every day since you left, and I don't even know how I let it get this far. I'm so sorry." Her words hung in the air, and I could tell she meant them. But sorry wasn't enough. Not now. Maybe not ever. I sat there watching Rachel struggle to find the right words, her hands trembling as she spoke. Part of me felt sorry for her, but the other part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, couldn't let go of the pain. I had spent so many nights wondering how we had ended up here, how everything we had built over the last 13 years could come crashing down so quickly. "Rachel," I began slowly, trying to gather my thoughts. "I understand being scared. I really do. But what you did, the lies, the secrecy, it's not something I can just forget. You didn't trust me enough to be honest from the start. And now I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Rachel's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. "I know I broke your trust, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I wish I could take it all back. But I can't. All I can do now is say I'm sorry, and hope that one day, maybe, you'll forgive me." The word forgive echoed in my mind. Forgiveness was something I hadn't even considered. Could I forgive her? Could I let go of the anger and hurt and find a way to move on? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for certain. Our marriage couldn't be saved. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too raw. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I admitted, my voice soft but firm. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you and not see what you did. I came here to hear your side, and I'm glad you were honest with me, but this is the end for us, Rachel." Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I felt a lump in my throat, but I held it together. There was nothing more to say. The love I had once felt for her was buried beneath layers of hurt, and I didn't know if it would ever resurface. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything we had lost hanging heavy in the air. Eventually, Rachel wiped her tears and looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I'll let you go," she said, her voice breaking. "I understand. I just wanted you to know how sorry I am. For everything." I nodded. "I appreciate that. And I'm sorry too. Sorry it had to end like this." With that, I stood up, feeling the finality of the moment settle over me. Rachel stayed seated, her hands clutching the coffee cup like it was the only thing grounding her. I wanted to say something more, something comforting, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. We were done. As I walked out of the coffee shop, the cool air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't relief, not exactly, but a quiet acceptance. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least now I could start moving forward. The days that followed my conversation with Rachel were a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and the occasional flash of anger. I had expected to feel more closure after our talk, but instead, I found myself grappling with the weight of what had been lost. 13 years of marriage, of shared memories, and now it was all over, packed away in a box labeled the past. I focused on the practicalities. I met with my lawyer again, finalized the paperwork, and arranged for the division of our assets. Rachel and I agreed that she would keep the house. I didn't want it anymore. It was too full of memories I no longer wanted to carry. She had offered to move out, but I knew that starting over somewhere new was what I needed. I found a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first few nights there were quiet, almost eerily so. I would lie awake, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside, and wonder how everything had gone so wrong. But over time, the apartment started to feel like a fresh start. I filled it with new furniture, hung up art on the walls, and slowly, it began to feel like home. Rachel and I kept our distance after that. The divorce went through without much drama, no drawn-out court battles or bitter arguments. We both knew it was over, and we handled it with as much grace as we could muster. Still, every once in a while, I'd catch myself thinking about her, wondering what she was doing, if she was happy. I didn't hate her, not anymore, but I knew I couldn't go back. The wounds were too deep. One afternoon, a few months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into a mutual friend. We made small talk, catching up on life, and eventually, the conversation turned to Rachel. "She's doing okay," they said, a bit hesitantly. "She's been through a lot, but I think she's trying to move on, same as you." I nodded, unsure of how to feel about that. Part of me was glad to hear she was doing well, but another part of me still felt the sting of everything we'd lost. As time passed, I started to feel lighter. The anger and hurt that had consumed me began to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve to move forward. I spent more time with friends, focused on my career, and slowly began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy, starting over never is, but I knew it was the only way to truly heal. One evening, I found myself sitting on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I had survived the storm, and though I was still standing in the aftermath, I knew I was going to be okay. There would always be a part of me that remembered Rachel and what we had shared, but it was time to let go. It was time to stop looking back and start focusing on the future. Whatever that future held, I was ready for it. As the months went by, life slowly began to feel normal again, or at least a new version of normal. I threw myself into work, took up running in the mornings, and reconnected with old friends. It was strange at first, navigating a world without Rachel. For so long, she had been part of my identity, part of who I was. but now I was learning how to define myself without her. I even started dating again. Nothing serious at first. Just casual dinners or drinks with people I met through friends or at work. It felt awkward in the beginning, like I was trying to relearn how to be in the world of relationships. But over time, I began to enjoy the process of meeting new people, of discovering what life could be like with someone new. One evening, after a particularly good date, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. The Chris from a year ago wouldn't have believed it was possible to feel this way again. Hopeful, excited about the future. But here I was, sitting at a table with a woman who made me laugh, who listened when I spoke, who reminded me that life could be beautiful again. Of course, there were still moments when the past crept back in. Rachel would cross my mind from time to time, usually in quiet moments when I least expected it. I'd wonder what she was doing, how she was handling things, and whether she had found the happiness she had been searching for. But those thoughts no longer carried the weight they once did. They were just memories now, part of a chapter that had ended. One day I got a letter from Rachel. It wasn't long, just a few lines really. She wrote to tell me she had moved to a new city, started a new job, and was trying to make a fresh start for herself. There was no mention of the past, no lingering apologies or pleas for forgiveness. Just a simple update, a way of closing the book on our shared history. I stared at the letter for a long time after reading it, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved to hear that she was moving on, while another part of me felt a lingering sadness for what could have been. But in the end, I knew that this was the way it had to be. We had both made mistakes, but we were both trying to find our way forward, and that was enough. I folded the letter and tucked it away in a drawer, knowing I wouldn't need to read it again. It was closure in its own way, a final acknowledgement that we had both moved on. Life didn't go back to the way it had been before, and I didn't expect it to. But slowly, day by day, it became something new, something better. I learned how to be on my own, how to find joy in the little things, and how to trust again, both in myself and in the possibility of love. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to face it. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had survived one of the hardest chapters of my life and come out stronger on the other side, and that I realized was enough. I realized